Welcome to Tony at 12. I'm Tony LeBlanc, and today I'm in conversation with Toby Birch, who is a senior investment manager at Gower Financial Services. We're going to review the first quarter of 2025 and then discuss the Trump effect. Want to remind you all opinions are personal and no investment advice is being given. Good to see you.
And you, Tony. Hello.
And hasn't that quarter gone quickly?
Yeah, it's 1 minute it's Christmas. Now we're seems like we're
Yeah,
in the middle of
into
spring.
Easter, and gosh, there it goes. Let's start off by having a quick look at the global markets over the last 3 months before
Before,
April.
like a long time ago.
Absolutely, yeah, yeah, yeah. Um, they didn't actually perform that well, did they? Looking at the stats I got from AJ Bell, FTSE 250, which is your index, up -5. Standard and Poor's in the States -4.3. Nikkei down 10.7 and the DAX plus 15.3. I was surprised at that.
Yeah, that was the effect of the defense companies in particular.
Yeah.
They had an absolute belting run on this rearmament idea, which again, it's stemmed from America in the first place. Obviously, they've lost a fair bit of that since, but yeah, it's nice to see Europe going up for once.
Yeah. And of course, looking at the S&P, we saw what they said in the newspaper as being the demise of the US Magnificent Seven. And they're
Yeah,
all the big
I
tech
think
companies, aren't they?
it's a bit of an early call. I mean, they're not going away. It's just that the share prices were overvalued. I
Yeah.
think in the last week or so, we've seen losses between like 6 and 16% as a rough guide for those share prices. But yeah, I think it's just it was already imbalanced and too much money had gone into those names, and so it should be a sensible correction. If you're in a tech portfolio like I do, I mean 20% losses are a part and parcel
Yeah.
of the game really, and then you bounce back and
Yeah.
have another great year.
So there we are. We think the Magnificent Seven will. Right, was it the Return of the Magnificent Seven, wasn't it? The
Well, I
second
think it's a few
movie.
versions of '97,
So
but
perhaps that's where we're looking at from that point of view.
yeah.
Energy prices, Brent crude on the 3rd of April was $72. I think it's even lower than that now, but we'll come on to that in a moment.
Okay.
And obviously sterling, with the euro and dollar, that's been thrown a little bit by President Trump. Now,
Yeah, I mean, yeah,
one thing that is going to, in my view, affect the UK economy, forgetting all the externals, is the fact that all of these tax increases came in April. And,
yeah,
I just can't understand how government thinks that you can jack up national insurance, jack up the minimum wage, and then expect companies to take the hit. I don't get it.
yeah. It's very much. I think a lot of what we see, and we'll come back to America, but a lot of what we're seeing is driven by philosophy. And I think we need to remember that Keir Starmer is a radically left-wing
Mm.
individual, as a member of the Fabian Society. And this drives us, although he wears a nice suit and expensively tailored,
Paid for
this is
somebody,
the
paid
agenda,
for by somebody else,
of
Toby.
course.
Back
Obviously.
to you, sorry.
Sponsored by. But yes, this, I think the socialists, um, they don't like, they don't like work, they don't like wealth, and it's always about punishment and taxation
Yeah.
rather than growth. We're already seeing the GDP figures are going to be almost flatlining before there's any talk of tariffs. So yeah, they just we keep going about the Laffer curve and the sweet spot of lower taxation, getting more tax revenue, and they just philosophically hate it, so that
That
it'll never happen.
is tax as far as they're concerned is a way of raising revenue and B, a punishment.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah,
Mm.
it's and of course the punishment works, but it doesn't
Yeah, it
raise
certainly does.
revenue.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. No, it's really concerning. But it's all going to be okay if you live in the UK because by the end of the Parliament, you're going to be £500 better off. The fact that energy prices have gone through the roof and the TV license has gone up and this, and this just
It's
doesn't seem to fit into the
Yeah,
equation.
and you got talking about oil prices before, they've been coming down. They're obviously down back down to $60 um, already, and that never gets passed on to consumer. It's almost like the whole of the UK is being it's got this like big parasite in the middle that just keeps on taking and taking, and maybe that's part to do with private equity, but it's just this kind of culture where the consumer comes last, effectively.
Private equity is a bit more honest, though, aren't
That's right.
they? I mean, at least they admit to what their method of modus
Nature of the beast.
operandi is. But there we
Yeah.
are. And then of course, looking once again at the UK, poor old farmers are getting nowhere
Mm.
in terms of the inheritance tax. And there was also a rumor recently that they were going to do away with red diesel, which would jack up the diesel price by a factor of two.
And we all pay. And again, it goes back to this philosophy. I mean, I think communists hate landowners as well as
Yeah,
to other categories of people. But if you go look at sort of China and Russia in the past, they've tried to collectivize farming, which has always ended in famine and mass starvation. And this philosophy just doesn't seem to go away. So poor farmers are being hammered. They're already less and less young people going into it. So it's kind of the death knell. So I think the underlying strategy is almost a land grab. And this
mm,
can take two forms. One is as a government attempt to take control of the food supply, which again, socialists love this idea of rationing, and it could go back to a social credit score as well, where you control what people can eat or can't eat. And there's also a sort of corporate aspect where which kind of lives with this ideology that the likes of BlackRock are hoovering up housing in America and also farmland. So there's this odd conjunction of extreme or well crony capitalism and socialism as well. So I'm quite cynical about what's going on because there's no logic to it.
no,
I've got following my son's marriage last year. One of the family members is a guy called Robbie Moore, who's a MP for Ilkley, big campaigner for
yeah.
farmers. He's got a farming background, and you may as well, throw rocks at the sea. It just because that philosophy is um, it's so indented into the mindset. They'll be happy when farmers are driven to the wall and will suddenly wonder why no one's got any food to eat, except them, of course. It's like,
I was a bit worried to learn that Bill Gates made a visit to 10 Downing Street recently.
yeah, it's the same with Boris Johnson as well. There's a lot of private deals going on. Bill Gates is one of the biggest landowners in America, and it's all this like green lobby saying, again, anti-farming, trying to sort of promote this idea of saving the planet by removing carbon. It's the ideology of sociopaths, and
Yeah.
against this theme that keeps coming up and trying to dress it up as something good when it's pure evil, really.
And do you see Red Ed Miliband staying the course? Because, they're sort of backing off a little bit, aren't they, on the green bit?
Yeah, it's still part of this philosophy. So while America gets goes for cheaper energy and economic growth, Europe's going the other way with more and more green. So there's a point where there'll be some relaxation. I mean, we're seeing this already with targets for EV production.
Yeah.
But ultimately, it's still there. It's still part and parcel of the movement, of the cult, I should say.
And of course, if they find a manufacturer is actually building too many internal combustion engine cars, they get fined. They get
Uh,
fined thousands,
it's again, it's tax and punishment, and it always has, and well, maybe intended consequences, but for you and me, it's unintended. We all
Yeah.
suffer.
Okay. Right. So let's move on to President Trump. Did you see this coming?
But I think he's very straightforward in that he does what he says,
Yeah.
and I think that again, if you go with the noise of tariffs, because that's only part of the equation. I think the underlying philosophy is that Wall Street's had it good for a long time, and now it's time for Main Street. And it almost harps back to like a 1960s utopia where you had a very strong middle class. You only had one parent who needed to work because the earnings were so good, and goods were cheap. And in those days, it had something called the Gini coefficient, which measures equality.
Yeah.
And the 60s was the kind of the heyday where you'd never had it so good. Obviously, before the Vietnam War kicked in. But I think there's a hankering towards this where blue collar it has more power. In the past, they've been hollowed out and jobs have gone to Asia and the like. And so this process is reversing. But the thing is, globalization has been going on for 30 years. So you just can't flick a switch and,
No, no,
build a
no.
factory and bring it all back to life. But that's the philosophy. And there's a phrase, when you know the destination, you understand the journey. And so tariffs are just part of this. So it's fully understandable. It's taken me a few days to try and figure it out, but I think there's a logic to it.
It had a tremendous effect on world stock markets, didn't it? Virtually as soon as it was published.
Yeah. I
Uh,
think it's again you had these steep falls after the quarter end. So, well, from February really, the S&P lost about 20% and the Nasdaq a bit more. So it was unexpected in terms of the scale of the tariffs, but I think this is just part of the negotiation tactic. I think 10% will be the new normal. And paradoxically, I think Trump's very keen on free trade, which you wouldn't think of
no,
when
not at the
you have
moment.
this, because the European Union have been protectionists for a long time and have had tariffs on American goods. I mean, I personally wouldn't want American car, but
No, that's
someone might
right.
do. But again, it goes back to this socialist idea of protectionism and tariffs to make it good for you. And I was looking at a newspaper headline from 1931 where the Americans were complaining about very much the same thing. So post World War One, the Europeans were trying to rebuild their economies and were trying to stop cheaper imports. So it is a strange juxtaposition that by using this negotiating tool, it could actually reduce the cost of goods in the long run. I think we've got to remember that all this pain is being done now to front load the economic impact and then have a better economy and better stock market leading up to the election in 4 years' time.
Of course, the article that you were referring to was post 1929, the Wall Street crash, wasn't it?
Yeah, yeah,
So, I mean,
and
that it was World War One plus the crash that had to
yeah, and
rebuild.
again, the strange thing is that at the time they're trying to blame um, uh, the depression on tariffs from Smoot-Hawley, but they actually didn't come in or start being debated about 1930 when the damage had been done. And what was really going on was that there'd been a debt crisis in Europe, and capital was flowing to America and strengthening the dollar. So there's also little echoes from history, but people trying to look back and blame something that wasn't the cause to suit their agenda, and we're having that right now.
Now, we saw a big hit, yesterday and Friday,
Mm.
but there seems to be an element of recovery today. Is it dead
Yeah,
cat bounce, or do you think the markets are, being sensible and saying, oh, well, perhaps, there is strategy here?
I think that it's been pretty extreme, but it's done and dusted from my point of view. When you look at the what's called the fear index, which is the volatility measure, this had a big spike, which peaked. I think it's yesterday. The futures were off about 5%, but the peak matched that of 2020 and 2008. And the thing that gave the clue that this was a temporary thing is the fact the dollar didn't wasn't strong because normally when you get stock market, everyone passed the dollar.
Yeah,
U.S. Treasuries did bounce, but it's very much a flash in the pan in my opinion. Not to say there's going to be a V-shaped recovery, but I think that the worst is over.
yeah.
But yeah,
A major correction.
yeah, and it perhaps just needed and really perhaps going to rebalance the markets from being all about growth to more mainstream industrial areas and value stocks, for example.
And of course, whilst we don't give advice, we must remind our viewers that a loss isn't a loss until it
Mm.
crystallizes. In other words, you sell the stock. And that's true,
Yeah,
isn't it?
yeah. I mean, we've not had. We, I can't think of any cases, and again, this is why it makes me quite confident, is that we haven't had clients jumping on the phone saying, "Get me into cash," which has happened in the past. It's
Yeah.
always been the wrong thing to do. And yeah, clients have been very calm. That's probably because our advisors are very good at you know, doing like risk assessments in the first place to say, how would you feel if your
Yeah.
portfolio fell by 20% or whatever. So yeah, overall, I'm pretty confident going forward that people adjust. It has been a shock, but the markets need this from time to time.
So looking at the actual tariffs that have been imposed, UK appears to have got away with it reasonably lightly at
Yeah.
10%, whereas the EU's in at 20. But from the UK's point of view, the dampener is the fact 25% on motor cars.
Well, yeah, I think I saw a statistic that I think is it 1 in 8 cars go to America or something. You might
Yeah,
know
it's
better than I,
big
but
and it's
um,
prestige brands.
it's yeah, it's quite yeah, quite something to overcome. But I think Starmer even was making the point that as we weren't in the EU, we were treated better from the tariff point of view.
But
So,
he wanted to stay, Toby. He didn't
oh
ever
yeah,
want to
exactly.
leave. Bit of
All of a sudden,
two-faced.
it's good news.
Yeah, yeah,
But I think I think people will start to queue up and reduce their tariffs on America. But I think this is like a baseline. And America has been unfairly treated in the past by other countries. But having a trade deficit isn't necessarily a bad thing or someone abusing someone else because America needs steel, it needs other
yeah.
commodities to make things in their factory. So it's not a black and white picture.
But of course, he wasn't too happy with his immediate neighbours, was he? Canada and Mexico. I mean, they
Yeah.
really got a bashing right from the start, and they're supposed to be in a trade arrangement, aren't they?
Yeah, I think we'll wait and see on that one.
So, looking at the affected British industries, we talk about prestige motor cars, of course.
Mm,
Airbus is obviously going to feel the effect up
yeah,
to a point, and of course Rolls-Royce Aero as well. But Rolls-Royce, I think, went on the record recently as saying they were going to double their factory in the States. So
yeah.
presumably that negates it.
Yeah, I think this is going to be the trend that I know Jaguar have halted their um, exports temporarily, but I think again that they're going to look to more and more production in America to overcome this, and this is what businesses do. So in some ways, it's better if Trump says the tariffs are here to stay, then at least businesses know what they're dealing with and can say, okay, we'll shift some production there. It's not a cheap country to produce goods by
No,
any means. Um,
high
and what
wages.
yeah, and what's the education going to be like compared to China? It's we're talking about things that have been in progress for, let's say, 30, 40 years,
Mm.
and it's very hard to reverse that. But as long as people know what they've got to deal with, they'll crack on with it.
He seems to have made a good job at annoying China because they've been really banged, haven't they, in terms of percentage?
Yeah, nothing like a bit of China bashing to be popular at home. I mean, you've got to remember, I mean, imports from China have been steadily declining anyway over the last 7, 8 years. But there's also a service element. So America exports, I think it's about $500 billion worth of services to China. And that's one thing that isn't hit by tariffs. It's physical goods rather than
Yeah.
actual intellectual capital as such. So it's yeah, they're easy targets. Again, Chinese are like the Russians, amazing strategists, and will just kind of they'll sort of bend with the wind and change policy accordingly. But again, it's a popular move. We're much better off trying to uh, deal sensibly with China because if you've got two of the biggest trading blocks, um, stymieing growth that way is bad for everyone because it's not. I think there's an idea there's a zero-sum game going on, but really, what's good for everyone creates a bigger pie effectively
Yeah.
and increases living standards.
Of course, as far as the car manufacturers are concerned, spare parts for American cars are coming from all over the world, aren't they? So
Exactly, and it
presumably they
needs to.
get caught by the tariff.
Yeah, again, it's everyone wants A equals B scenario. You can do one thing leads to another,
Yeah.
but there's so many cross currents of whatever you do nowadays with globalization that you can't just attack one thing, expect to have no impact on the other. So you're right, it's going to have I'm sure there will be an inflationary impact. I mean, in Trump's last term, uh, there wasn't any particular hit on inflation. That could have been due to other factors. And the Federal Reserve also said this is a transitory thing as well.
Yeah.
So but inflation is coming down in the States. We'll see this week for the numbers. But I can't see how this is going to help though.
When we did the last show, I think it was, we talked about Ashtead, the
Mhm.
plant hire outfit,
Oh,
be
yeah.
relisting in the States. How does that affect a company if they're actually quoted on the States stock markets?
I'm not sure that would make a big enough difference because this is all about physical things rather than financial.
Yeah,
And because have a listing in the States, the idea from the director's point of view is to get a higher valuation because of the premium of being US listed. It doesn't mean that you're doing anything in America necessarily.
no.
So if they then have production there, it would be fine. But I think that yeah, the listing is valuation rather than anything tariff related, even if you'd have foreseen that.
And I'd like to know who actually gets the funds generated by the tariffs. The
Um,
Internal Revenue Service, presumably.
Yes, this is part of the again, it's like treating America like a business. So that they take in 4 trillion, 6 trillion
Yeah,
each year. Budget deficit, like a company, you cut the costs, i.e., you slash the government workforce, you increase the income through tariffs in this case. So it's really trying to almost like balance the budget first, because that's the first thing you got to do. Then you can that then has an impact on the overall federal debt, which is massive at 124% of GDP. So this is all part of a chain of events, and also the trade deficit is an element of that. But again, it's not black and white. You've also got the fact that the US dollar is the reserve currency of the world.
yeah.
So there's a reason why the trade deficit's there. So you can't have your cake and eat it. You can't be reserve currency and say we're not having any deficits. So it's I think that there is logic to it, but it's not just you can't just say we're going to do X and Y as a result. There's
Yeah,
too many
yeah, yeah,
counterfactors going on.
yeah. Because the one thing that I see as a simpleton is that by definition tariffs equal inflation.
Yeah, I mean, again, this is part of a tool. It, it, if we get more free trade from this, then it should make goods cheaper. And strange enough, we've seen this on egg prices, which Trump was complaining about before. They've come down significantly. So I think it's a logical view, but it doesn't necessarily transpire in the real economy all the time. But I think that this will because it's the biggest change in 100 years. Um, Again, just thinking back to we were talking about the 1930s with the Smoot-Hawley tariff. This was only applied to agricultural goods and not other areas. And we've also got the services being exempt. So again, it's not not guaranteed to be inflationary, but there's bound to be an element there. And what the Federal Reserve won't do, they won't repeat the mistake of the 1980s where they cut rates too soon and inflation shot up. So I think the chance of rate cuts is going to be, I think there will be some to come this year in America, but they won't be particularly deep as much as Trump would like to, slash rates for the sake of it.
Because JP Morgan have gone on record as saying they think there's chances of a recession 60%, 60.
I think it was kind of going that way anyway. I mean, if you
Yeah.
look at the consumer confidence numbers, they had 4 months of back-to-back declines, and also there's also a future confidence survey as well, which is at a 12-year low. So it was going that way, and if it means that the economy can reform, or as Trump calls, go through a detox, then the idea is that it bounces back much more strongly. And, yeah, time will tell.
Yeah, yeah. Um, we've seen a bit of an improvement today with the FTSE and other indexes.
Yeah.
How long do you think it will take for the markets to rebalance? And what's the definition of rebalancing here?
Yeah, I mean that's a good point because the markets had been imbalanced. As you saw from last year, actually the year before was more extreme, where the top seven, the Mag 7 names, dominated the gains and everything else was flat or negative. So last year, I think 66% of the S&P components were up. Um, and so that's a case of rebalancing is where I think you'll get more the value shares doing as well as growth. So you don't have to have growth collapsing, just maybe um, being static while the traditional stocks do better. So I think this rebalancing is long overdue, and value versus growth has been just falling and falling for at least 10 years.
Mm.
So it could be a healthy rebalance and means that indices and people, particularly like index trackers,
Yeah.
won't get so dominated by tech. So for our clients, and again, it's not a sales pitch or advertising, because we use multi-asset funds and tend to avoid index trackers. I mean, the downside loss has been pretty minimal compared to the S&P 500 and Nasdaq, purely because it's better diversified. Because before diversification didn't pay off, you're better off being just buying tech.
Yeah.
So now I think it's a healthy rebalance, and I think uh, it could be good for the market again longer term. Maybe not for the rest of this year, but longer term it could have a very powerful bull market.
Now let's change the subject and get on to another item of government
Okay.
expenditure, which of course is defence.
Oh yeah.
I saw my good friend and your good friend, Mr. McDowell, the other
Oh
day,
yes.
and he was talking about raising funds for defence and
Mhm.
suggested undated war loan stock with all the funds hypothecated to the MOD
Yeah.
made sense. What do you think
Mhm.
about that as an idea? I thought it
Well,
was
at
quite
least,
good.
yeah. I mean, it's very honest. What happened in the Second World War, the First War, was that you issued war bonds with a maturity date. And the war was over. They said, "Oh, we're not going to let these mature and give you your money back. It's going to go on for." Well, they did eventually get paid off 70 years later, but we had a big inflation spike in the meantime in the 70s. So all these, widows and orphans, if you like, who'd bought war bonds through, loyalty
Yeah,
and duty, were completely ripped off by the government. So at least by saying these are undated, like what we call consoles
yeah.
in the past, at least it's honest, and if you're going to get decent income um, from holding them, the government guaranteed, then why not? It's also then goes back to, well, the MOD are pretty notorious at being appalling project managers. Um, and whether you spent 5 or 10% of your GDP on defense, the last 30 years has seen a great undermining of the military and the way the troops are treated, the housing, the kit. I mean, my sons came back from Norway with frost damage because they had to wear official kit. Because normally they use American stuff because it's so much
Yeah,
better.
yeah, yeah.
And it's, you know, if like Royal Marines are getting injured in Norway, I mean, God knows how people would do in a Russian warfare.
Well, that's the worry. And I mean, I really think the government, all governments, have been atrocious in terms of the way they've actually looked after the veterans.
Yeah, it's like the old Kipling phrase of, Tommy this and Tommy that, and when the war's on, they're all best buddies, but
Yeah, yeah,
most of the time they're tossed in the street or end up
yeah.
homeless with no benefits.
Absolutely, and I think that is absolutely disgusting. It really annoys me, and it doesn't matter which party.
Yeah,
They're all guilty of it, and something needs to be done about that. I mean, I was seeing the other day that they're having to close the poppy factory in Kent because it's structurally unsafe. It's got a load of asbestos in,
yeah.
and they
I mean, it's,
honestly don't know where they can go to.
yeah. It's a big thing for me because I'm involved with the poppy distribution in Guernsey,
Yeah.
and that really touches a chord with me.
Mm, mm.
Everything's dilapidated, the kit's rubbish, the paste pad. So I'm quite glad because my son's now put his notice in, so you have a year before you transition to civilian life. But I'm quite relieved actually.
Well, it must have been a bit of a concern for you from that point of
Mm.
view. How many years did he do?
He'll have done 10 by the time he goes, and
Yeah.
he's like a sniper, very, very qualified individual. But these are the type of people who are leaving, and the special forces are finding it difficult to get people even to go on selection at the moment because
Mm,
they're so thinned out. Their regiments won't let them go on, do the selection course. So it's really quite grim, and just throwing a lot of money at it now. I'm not sure how that makes a difference because regiments are about culture and
yeah.
history
Of
and
course.
regional loyalty. So yeah, it's very hard to reverse. So I'm definitely not one calling for a war against Russia, because Macron's got this Napoleon complex. And you all know what happened in 1812.
Another short man, wasn't he?
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
classic.
absolutely. But
Yeah,
yeah, I mean, I think it's quite incredible from that point of
yeah.
view. Did I read somewhere, coming back to this question of the stocks, the consols,
Mm.
that Britain and France actually defaulted on some of
Well,
the World War
um,
One stuff?
technically, yeah, so default is when you change the maturity date or coupon
Oh,
payments. That
okay, okay.
get
They
the
didn't
sort of,
just sort of say we're not going to pay it anymore.
yeah. So it's kind of it was a technical default, and realistically as well, it was theft in all but name. As a French word, légèrement, which means light of hand, which I think I read an article about this once about the
I,
merry-go-round of
you
money.
never cease to amaze me with the
Oh,
way you turn these faces in and everything else. Right, so talking about NATO
mm,
and the fact that Trump, rightly so, wishes to see substantial increases in contributions. I was appalled to see that Spain was down to 1.28% of national product,
yeah.
GMP. What a crazy situation.
Yeah, it's again, I think Americans refer to burden sharing, which I think is fair, and a lot of countries have just lived um, under the umbrella of America's protection, and now got to pay a price just at the time when they're struggling anyway, and Europe's been, in fact, yeah, I think probably mentioned it before, but Europe's GDP per capita has been flat since 2008, and America's has shot up. So
Yeah,
we're in this continual process of decay in Europe, and again, it goes back to this idea of socialism. And I find it incredible that the EU is meant to be set up to prevent war because they've actually had one government, and now
yeah,
they're desperate to go to war against Russia because wars are great at clearing the deck, uh, you know, resetting currencies and debt and the like. So it's pretty sad to see because the idea behind it was, again, Churchill was keen on the idea of a united Europe, and now it may as well be a dictatorship effectively.
well, yeah. I mean, it hasn't changed much from the 1930s, has it?
Yeah,
Really, if you think
yeah,
about it, other than the fact that perhaps there's no genocide involved
yeah,
anymore.
no.
But yeah, I couldn't agree more. I think it's
Mm.
it's crazy the way it's all gone. But there we are. Anyway, my last question is, what next?
Okay. Besides, I know it's very easy to fall into kind of the negative headlines recently, and it has been a shock. But uh, even during the worst days, I had a underlying sense that it wasn't going to be too bad. Again, because things like the dollar didn't strengthen, and you had this spike in the volatility index, I kind of felt this is it feels pretty temporary. And then moving on, I think people aren't allowed to say anything nice about Trump, but he does have very good advisors behind the scene. And I think what he believes is that in his first term, he was let down by some like fifth columnists,
Mhm.
effectively,
Yeah,
who were trying to undermine him internally. But now I think he's got a team who are, I know there's some like braggarts and, a bit gobby, as we'd say in Liverpool. Um, but the movement is there to, reform the economy. Again, if you think about the financial statistics, think top 1% own 50% of US equities, and the bottom 50% of the people own 1% of equity. So
yeah,
there's huge inequality build up, and I think that's going to unravel and improve life for many people. I think he's also very smart when he's remember the Plaza Accord from the 80s, got the Mar-a-Lago Accord where he's going to revalue gold back to its market price. It's always been stuck at this 1970 level. So
yeah.
that's just a smart little move just to potentially reduce deficits. And so there's a lot of good stuff happening, but most of the press will just be against whatever Trump does, even if it benefits you and me and the white collar workers. So fundamentally, I'm pretty positive about things. Short term, there's going to be still be some bumps for the stock market this year, I'd have thought, but ultimately, as a born cynic, I find myself sort of reluctantly being quite positive at the moment.
Well, time will tell,
Yeah.
and of course we'll be having a chat hopefully at the end of June.
God willing, yeah,
No,
of course.
end of July. End of July. Sorry about that.
Yeah.
And we'll see how your prognostications went. But yeah,
Till
I
it gets
mean,
moving, isn't it?
it's the old story. Nobody knows the answer,
Yeah,
but
yeah, it's true. Yeah.
it's been very entertaining, very informative, and
Thank
many
you.
many thanks as ever. So, see you next time.
Pleasure. Thank you. All
Thank
the
you,
best.
Toby.